My grandfather had a garage that smelled like oil, sawdust, and something I could never quite name. Maybe time itself. Every wall had pegboards covered in tools I had never seen before, each one hanging in its exact spot, worn smooth by decades of use. He knew every single one by name. He knew what it did, when to use it, and exactly how much force it took to do the job right without stripping a thread or splitting a board. When he passed, most of those tools went into boxes. Some were sold at the estate sale for a few dollars each to people who didn't know what they were buying. A few ended up in landfills, and with them went an entire vocabulary of skill that most Americans under 50 have never heard spoken aloud. Today we're going back to the 1950s American garage, that golden era when a man could fix almost anything that broke in his house, his car, or his neighborhood. And we're going to recover 20 tools that were once as common as a hammer, but have now nearly vanished from memory. Some of these you might recognize. Some will make you shake your head and wonder how we ever forgot something so useful. And number 3 on this list was actually banned in several states before making a quiet comeback decades later. Stay with us for that one. If you grew up with a father or grandfather who kept a proper shop, drop a comment below and tell me the tool you remember most. And if this is your first time here, subscribe now, because every week we go deep into the skills and knowledge that built this country. Let's get into it. Number 20 is the push drill. Before cordless drills existed, before power tools were affordable for the average working man, the push drill was the tool every serious garage had mounted on the pegboard within easy reach. It looked almost like a screwdriver with a thick, spiral-fluted handle, and the way it worked was elegant in its simplicity. You pressed down on the handle, and the internal spiral mechanism spun the drill bit at the tip, driving small holes into wood with nothing but the weight of your hand. Release the pressure, and a spring returned the handle to the top, ready for the next push. Craftsmen in the 1950s could sink a pilot hole for a screw in about 3 seconds with one of these. No cord to trip over, no battery to charge, no motor to burn out. The most popular version was made by Yankee Tools, a brand so associated with this style that many old-timers simply called any push drill a Yankee drill. These tools were built to last decades, and many of them did. You can still find them at estate sales and flea markets today, often still in working condition. The precision they offered for delicate woodworking was something early power drills simply couldn't match. A power drill would blow out the wood around a small pilot hole. The push drill gave you exactly what you needed, nothing more. When battery-powered tools got cheap enough for every household in the 1970s and 80s, the push drill quietly disappeared from store shelves, and most people never noticed it was gone. Number 19 is the hand brace. If the push drill handled small holes, the hand brace handled the serious work. This was a U-shaped crank tool with a chuck at the bottom that accepted a variety of large auger bits, and the leverage you could generate by cranking that U-shaped frame was remarkable. Carpenters in the 1950s used hand braces to drill through floor joists, through fence posts, through thick oak beams, work that required real torque, and the hand brace delivered it through pure mechanical advantage and muscle. A man who knew how to use one could drill a 2-inch hole through solid hardwood in under a minute. The sweep of that U-shaped crank, typically ranging from 8 to 12 inches, determined how much torque you could apply, and experienced craftsmen chose their brace based on the material they worked most. Most garages in the post-war era had at least 2, a smaller one for finish work and a larger one for rough construction. Today you can find these at antique stores mislabeled as decorative items because the people pricing them no longer know what they are. Number 18 is the spoke shave. This one looks like nothing so much as a miniature plane with 2 handles sticking out sideways, and it was the essential tool for shaping curved surfaces. Chair legs, bow handles, rake handles, wheel spokes, anything that needed a smooth curve that a flat plane couldn't follow. In the 1950s, a man who maintained his own property almost certainly owned a spoke shave because wooden handles broke, wagon wheel spokes cracked, and furniture needed refinishing. You pulled or pushed the tool along the curve, adjusting the depth of cut with 2 small thumb screws. And with a little practice, you could produce a surface so smooth it barely needed sanding. The name comes from its original use shaping the wooden spokes of carriage wheels. But by the post-war era, it had become a general-purpose shaping tool for any garage or woodshop. Stanley and Record, Both made excellent versions that sold for a few dollars and lasted a lifetime if you kept the blade sharp. Ask anyone under 40 what a spokeshave is today, and most will stare at you blankly. Number 17 is the draw knife. Before the spokeshave finished the curve, the draw knife roughed it out. This was a long blade with two wooden handles perpendicular to the blade, one at each end, and you drew it toward you along a piece of wood clamped in a shaving horse or a vise. The draw knife removed wood fast, faster than any plane, and in skilled hands, it produced surprisingly clean surfaces, even on rough stock. Fence builders used them to shape fence posts and rails. Furniture makers used them to rough in chair legs before finishing with the spokeshave. Farmers used them for 100 different tasks around the homestead. In the post-war suburban garage, the draw knife was the tool you reached for when you needed to remove a lot of material quickly without firing up a power tool. They were cheap, they never broke, and they lasted forever. Today they're collector items, which is a polite way of saying most people have forgotten what they're for. Number 16 is the Yankee screwdriver. This was a push-action screwdriver built on the same spiral ratchet principle as the push drill, and it was so beloved in American workshops that the brand name Yankee became synonymous with the design. You pressed down and the handle spun the blade, driving screws far faster than you could by turning a conventional screwdriver by hand. The ratchet mechanism let you switch between driving and removing screws without lifting the tool, and a neutral position locked it for use as a standard screwdriver. Cabinet makers, furniture assemblers, and general contractors kept these at arm's reach throughout the 1950s. A good craftsman could drive a dozen screws in the time it took someone else to drive 3 with a manual screwdriver. When electric screwdrivers arrived, the Yankee was one of the first casualties. But old-timers will tell you the electric version never had the same feel, the same feedback in your palm that told you exactly when the screw was set without stripping the head. Number 15 is the cold chisel. Don't confuse this with a wood chisel. The cold chisel was an all-steel tool with no handle, designed to cut through metal, brick, concrete, and stone. You held it against the material and struck the flat head with a ball-peen hammer, and it would cut through things that would ruin a wood chisel in a single blow. In the 1950s, garage it was indispensable for cutting rusted bolts, splitting old rivets, cutting through cast iron, trimming brick, and breaking up concrete patches. Every mechanic owned several in different widths. The name cold chisel refers to the fact that it cuts metal in its cold state, as opposed to hot chisels used in blacksmithing on heated metal. These tools haven't entirely disappeared, but the auto parts store generation doesn't reach for a cold chisel the way their grandfathers did. They reach for an angle grinder. The result is noisier, messier, and often worse. Number 14 is the floor flange tap wrench. Now we're getting into territory that most people have never heard of. A tap wrench was the tool used to cut threads into a drilled hole, to create a nut, essentially, directly in a piece of metal or wood. The floor flange version was a T-handled tool that gave you the control to start a tap perfectly straight, which was the most critical part of the process. In the 1950s, a man who could cut his own threads was a man who never had to wait for a part to be shipped, never had to pay a machinist for a simple repair, and never had to throw away a piece of equipment because a single threaded hole had stripped out. Re-threading a stripped bolt hole in a cast iron engine block was a Saturday morning task, not a trip to the dealership. This skill and the tools that enabled it are almost completely gone from the residential garage today. Number 13 is the scratch-awl. Simple, ancient, utterly reliable. The scratch-awl was a pointed steel spike in a wooden or plastic handle, and it had more uses in the 1950s garage than most people today would believe. You used it to scribe layout lines in metal and wood that wouldn't rub off like pencil marks. You used it to punch starting holes for screws so they wouldn't wander when you started drilling. You used it to mark measurements on leather, to open cans of paint, to pick locks on old toolboxes, to align holes when bolting two pieces together. A craftsman who had been working for decades could accomplish things with a scratch-awl that a modern worker would need 3 different tools to approximate. These still exist and still work perfectly, but the generation that knew every use for them is mostly gone. If you have one of your grandfather's awls in a drawer somewhere, don't throw it away. Drop a comment below and tell me if you still use one. I want to know how many of you still have the old skills alive in your hands. Number 12 is the hand reamer. After you drilled a hole, a reamer was what you used to make that hole precisely the right size and perfectly smooth inside. A hand reamer looked like a long, fluted rod with a square drive on top for a tap wrench, and turning it through a drilled hole removed tiny amounts of material with incredible precision. In the 1950s, men who worked on their own vehicles needed reamers to fit replacement pins, bushings, and bearings exactly. Sloppy holes meant sloppy fits, meant things that wobbled and wore out fast. A good mechanic had a set of reamers in graduated sizes and used them as naturally as a surgeon uses the right scalpel. The concept of precision hole finishing has not gone away. Machinists still use reamers constantly. But it has completely left the residential garage, along with the patience and the eye for fit that made it possible. Number 11 is the tin snips, or aviation snips. These still exist, but the 1950s versions and the way they were used represent a lost art. Sheet metal work was a core skill of the post-war American garage. Men fabricated their own repair patches for car bodies, made their own ductwork, built their own tool storage, cut flashing for roof repairs, all using tin snips and a bench-mounted metal brake. Aviation snips, the compound leverage version developed for cutting aluminum aircraft skins, became available to civilians after World War II and spread quickly through American workshops because they cut curves and compound shapes that straight snips couldn't manage. A man with a good set of aviation snips, a metal brake, and a drill could fabricate almost any sheet metal part he needed without ordering it or paying a body shop. Today, that combination of skills and confidence is nearly extinct in residential use. Number 10 is the hacksaw with a proper blade selection. I know what you're thinking. Hacksaws still exist, but the way they were used in the 1950s is what's been lost. A serious garage kept hacksaw blades in at least 4 different tooth counts: 14 TPI for thick, soft metal, 18 TPI for general use, 24 TPI for thin wall tubing, and 32 TPI for sheet metal and thin stock. Choosing the wrong blade meant a rough cut, broken teeth, or a blade that bound and snapped after 3 strokes. Men in the 1950s knew instinctively which blade to grab for which job, tensioned the blade correctly in the frame, kept spare blades oiled in a labeled tin, and cut with smooth, consistent strokes that let the blade do the work. Today, most people who own a hacksaw have one blade, don't know its tooth count, and wonder why it cuts badly and breaks quickly. The tool is still there, the knowledge is gone. Number 9 is the bit brace extension. This was an accessory for the hand brace, a long, articulated extension rod that let you drive auger bits into places the brace itself couldn't reach. Deep inside a wall cavity, at the bottom of a narrow slot, around a corner obstruction. Extension sets came in lengths of 6, 12, and 18 inches and were sold in hardware stores alongside the brace bits themselves. In the post-war building boom, men who were framing their own additions and finishing their own basements needed to drill through plates and joists in tight spaces, and the bit brace extension was how they got it done without cutting the wall open. The extension has a universal joint at each end that transfers rotation even around gentle curves, which sounds like magic until you've used one. These have become so obscure that even most professional carpenters have never seen one. Number 8 is the surface gauge. This was a precision layout tool used to scribe lines parallel to a reference surface, a flat base with an adjustable pointed scriber on a vertical post, and you dragged it across your work to mark a perfect horizontal line at whatever height you set. Machinists used them constantly, but so did the serious home mechanic who was rebuilding an engine, fitting a head gasket, or checking whether a surface was truly flat after machining. In the 1950s, a man who was serious about his garage had a surface gauge, a surface plate, and knew how to use both. The knowledge of how to check and establish true flat references has almost completely left the home workshop, replaced partly by digital measurement tools, and partly by the assumption that you should just take your work to a shop and let someone else do it. Number 7 is the hand plane, specifically the number 5 jack plane. Before we go further, let me tell you something. The skills we're talking about in this video are not just about tools. They're about a relationship with the material world that is being broken, generation by generation, and most people don't notice until something goes wrong and they discover that no one around them knows how to fix it. The number 5 jack plane was the workhorse of the 1950s garage. A cast iron body about 14 inches long with a blade set at a precise angle, used to flatten, square, and smooth rough lumber before using it. A man who could set a plane iron correctly, adjust the mouth opening for the depth of cut, read the grain of the wood, and work with long, confident strokes could take rough-sawn lumber from the lumber yard and produce surfaces that were better than what most modern woodworkers achieve with power tools and sandpaper. The skill is in the feel. The sound of the iron engaging the wood, the curl of a perfect shaving coming off the sole. Stanley made millions of these planes, and tens of thousands survive in perfect working condition in barns and attics and estate sales across America. If you know how to tune one up and use it, you have a skill that almost no one your age shares with you. Number 6 is the chain pipe wrench. The standard pipe wrench, the big heavy adjustable jaw type, is still common. But the chain pipe wrench, which used a bicycle chain-style loop instead of a jaw to grip and turn round or a regular pipe, has nearly vanished. The chain wrench had one enormous advantage over the jaw type. It could grip pipe in tight spaces where the long handle of a standard pipe wrench wouldn't fit, and it could grip odd-shaped fittings and rounded-off nuts that the jaw type would just slip on. Plumbers in the 1950s kept both types. The home mechanic who maintained his own plumbing kept both types. Today, the chain pipe wrench has been largely displaced by strap wrenches, which are gentler on finished surfaces, and by the general decline of home plumbing work. Most hardware stores no longer carry chain pipe wrenches in their regular inventory. Number 5 is the bench vise with a pipe jaw. The 1950s bench vise was a serious piece of cast iron equipment bolted permanently to the workbench, and the good ones had a second set of jaws on the back of the fixed jaw, curved to grip pipe and rod stock. The main flat jaws were protected by replaceable jaw caps, could open to 6 or 8 inches, and exerted enormous clamping force through a heavy screw mechanism. A man's bench vise was one of the most expensive items in his garage and one of the most used. He bolted it to a bench that he had built himself, at exactly the right height for his work, and he used it every single time he went into the shop. You could clamp parts for welding, hold pipe for cutting and threading, secure work for drilling and chiseling, clamp boards for hand planing, and do 100 other tasks. The pipe jaw on the back meant you never needed a separate pipe vise. These heavy-duty vises are still made, Wilton and Yost and a few others. But the lightweight Chinese vises sold at big box stores today are not the same thing. The old men knew the difference the moment they put their hand on the screw. Number 4 is the Jenny caliper, also called an odd leg caliper or hermaphrodite caliper. This tool had one straight leg like a compass and one curved leg like a divider, and it was used to scribe a line parallel to an edge at a precise distance. The kind of layout work that was essential before power tools and jigs made it possible to approximate precision through repetition. Set the curved leg against the edge of a workpiece, set the straight leg to the distance you needed, and draw the tool along the edge to scribe a perfect parallel line in metal or wood. Machinists use them daily. Pattern makers use them constantly. The home mechanic who was doing serious work used them whenever precision mattered. They cost almost nothing and lasted forever. Today they are sold as vintage machinist tools to collectors who display them on shelves rather than use them on metal. Number 3 is the lead melting pot and ladle. Here is the one I warned you about at the beginning, the tool that was effectively banned in residential use. In the 1950s, many serious garages contained a small cast iron pot and a ladle used for melting lead to pour repairs. Lead was cheap, had a low melting point, and could be poured into molds, used to weight fishing sinkers, fill gaps in old pipe joints, repair weight balance issues on homemade equipment, and even fill splits in some types of castings as a temporary repair. Hardware stores sold lead in bars or ingots for exactly this purpose. Beginning in the late 1960s and accelerating through the 1970s, lead was removed from house paint, gasoline, plumbing solder, and eventually from residential use entirely as the health consequences became understood. By the 1980s, pouring molten lead in your garage was something that got you a visit from the fire department if your neighbors noticed the fumes. The tool itself, the pot and ladle, was never specifically banned for adults in most jurisdictions, but the lead itself became nearly impossible to buy in hardware form, and the practice died out almost completely. Old estate sale finds sometimes still include these pots with lead residue still inside them, and the people running the sale have no idea what they're looking at. Number 2 is the taper reamer, also called a pipe reamer or deburring reamer. After cutting pipe or conduit with a hacksaw or pipe cutter, the cut end had a burr on the inside edge, a raised ring of metal that would restrict flow in a water pipe, snag wire insulation in conduit, or create a stress point that would crack fittings over time. The taper reamer was a cone-shaped cutting tool that you inserted into the cut end and rotated by hand to remove that burr cleanly and consistently. Every plumber in the 1950s had one. Every electrician doing conduit work had one. Every serious home mechanic who cut his own pipe had one. Today, pipe cutters often come with a small fold-out reamer blade, but these tiny blade reamers produce rough results compared to the full taper reamer. And many people who cut pipe today don't deburr it at all. The pipes still work. They just don't last as long and don't flow as well. Nobody notices until the fitting cracks 15 years later. And now, the tool that every man who walked into a 1950s American garage would have seen mounted in the most accessible spot on the pegboard, number 1 on our list, the combination square. I know what you're thinking. Combination squares still exist. You can buy one at the hardware store right now. But what has been completely lost is the way the craftsmen of the 1950s understood and used this tool, and that loss is the real story here. A combination square from that era was a precision instrument. The best ones, Starrett, Brown, and Sharp, Lufkin, were ground flat on the reference face to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. The blade was hardened steel, graduated in fractions and sometimes decimals. The head slid along the blade and locked with a thumb screw, and the combination of the square head and the blade gave you a tool that could check squareness, measure depth, scribe parallel lines, check 45-degree angles, find centers on round stock, and serve as a height gauge when combined with a surface plate. A good craftsman in the 1950s set the combination square the way a musician tunes an instrument, checking it regularly against a known reference, cleaning the blade channel so the head slid smoothly and seated perfectly, protecting the reference face from dings and rust with a light coat of oil. He knew that if his square was off, everything he built would be off, and there was no power tool that could compensate for starting with bad measurements. The combination square was not decorative. It was not a gift item. It was the tool that made all other work accurate, and a man who didn't know how to use it properly, who couldn't check its own accuracy, who didn't understand how to read the blade at the correct angle to avoid parallax error, was not yet a craftsman, no matter what other tools he owned. You can still find old Starrett combination squares at estate sales and flea markets, sometimes for just a few dollars because the person selling doesn't know what they have. If you find one, buy it. Clean it, check it for accuracy against a known reference surface, and learn to use it the way the men of the 1950s used it. You will have in your hands a tool that, in its own quiet way, represents everything that has been lost and everything that can still be recovered. Here is what I want you to understand as we close out this list. The tools we talked about today were not exotic. They were not the province of professionals only. They lived in the garages of ordinary American men, factory workers, salesmen, teachers, truck drivers, who had been taught by their fathers and their shop teachers and their neighbors that a man who owned a house and a family was responsible for keeping both in working order, and that responsibility required knowing your tools. The 1950s were not a perfect time, but the relationship those men had with the physical world, with materials and mechanics and the satisfaction of making something work with your hands, that relationship was real, and it gave them a kind of confidence and competence that went far beyond the garage. When something broke, they fixed it. When something wore out, they rebuilt it. When something needed to be made, they made it. We lost that not because the tools stopped working, but because we decided, gradually and without ever quite choosing it, that it was more convenient to let someone else handle it. Now tell me, which one of these tools did you recognize? Which one did you learn from your grandfather, your father, your shop teacher? Leave a comment below and let's keep this knowledge alive, even if it's just in the conversation. If you want to see more videos like this, skills that built America, tools that have been forgotten, Knowledge that deserves to be passed on. Subscribe right now and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. The old ways are not gone. They are just waiting for someone to remember them.